Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our May Wednesday with Wing. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Katherine Deeming. Katherine is an environmental geoscientist with degrees from Lancaster University and Cardiff University. Prior to starting her PhD, she was working as an engineer on geotechnical and geoenvironmental ground investigation projects ranging from Devon to the Isle of Skye. She started her PhD in April 2022 at the University of Strathclyde, supervised by Professor Zoe Shipton, Dr. Jen Roberts and Dr. Jen Dickey, University of Stirling. Her research aims to integrate the spatial data on Minewater resources and that of demand, opportunity and other environmental and social factors, using the Central Belt of Scotland as a case study. This talk will present work from her current project, which is investigating the awareness of Minewater geothermal resources among industrial and commercial stakeholders in Scotland, in order to inform Scottish enterprise about the economic potential of this low carbon heating technology. So, Katherine, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll see you at the end. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Hello, everybody. I'm Katherine Deeming, and as Lucy said, I'm at the University of Strathclyde. I'm a second year PhD student now. So let's just get straight into it. So I just thought I'd start my project with my presentation with a little bit about myself. So this is me, and this is my PhD title here. So I'm trying to integrate the spatial data on the surface, basically with Minewater data from the subsurface. And we'll get more onto what Minewater is if people aren't aware of it. So before I get into the main part of my talk, I thought I would just do a bit of an introduction as to how I ended up doing this, how I got into Minewater geothermal. So I started doing my undergrad at Lancaster University, and I did Earth and Environmental Science, which I really enjoyed. It was a really holistic kind of course, and we looked at all different aspects of the Earth system, like from geology and volcanology to atmospheric science and climate change. And I had a particular focus on hydrology, and we got to go on a lot of trips around the northwest of England in the Lake District and Yorkshire Dales. And I was also lucky enough to go to Etna on a volcanology trip, which was super fun. And so then when I finished at Lancaster, I wasn't really sure what to do next. So I ended up getting a job as a field studies instructor. So I'll be running field trips for geology and geography for school groups, mainly for year 6 classes, which was like 10 to 11, but I did have a couple of A-level classes, and I found it a really fun and rewarding job because I was living on the Jurassic Coast, which all you geologists out there will know that's a big area for English geology, and so that kind of reignited my interest in geology. So then I started studying for a master's in the autumn at Cardiff University, and I did applied environmental geology, which was a very vocational focused master's, which was aiming to get people a job in consultancy or contracting at the end. So we focused a lot on geotechnical, how do I get the laser? There we go. Geotechnical engineering. So we went out on lots of trips and saw lots of things like these soil nails, lots of this kind of thing, lots of, kind of geotechnics stuff. And we also did a lot of contaminated land. So this was a trip we went to a landfill in the Welsh Valleys, which was interesting, but slightly smelly, but interesting. And then this is in Blaenavon in the Welsh Valleys. It's a big pit, and we went down a coal mine. And I'll come on to that in a minute. So yeah, when I finished my master's, I got a job in Lincoln, which is where I'm from, in an environmental consultancy. And then I got another job as an engineer at a geotechnical consultancy down in Exeter. And this is from that job. I was part of a ground investigation project briefly up on the Isle of Skye, which was super cool. And I did a lot of this kind of thing, monitoring boreholes. And I had a little horse come to visit me one time. So yeah. So you might be thinking at this point, how did I end up getting into geothermal, given that I've done kind of geotechnics and stuff? But yeah, basically, when I was doing my master's in Cardiff, we visited this coal mine, and we went down the coal mine and had a look round. And we also on the same day went to this mining waste treatment site, which was coming from an adit, and it was treating all the water and I found it pretty interesting. And then towards the end of the Masters, we had a lecture about geothermal heat from coal mines in Wales, because my supervisor was kind of involved with it in Cardiff, and I found it really interesting. And then the pandemic happened, and we all had to do our dissertations from home, and I was back home in Lincoln, and I didn't really know what to do, because there's not much industrial legacy back in Lincolnshire. So I decided to look into doing something in Nottinghamshire, where there was a lot of mining. So I ended up doing a feasibility study for a colliery, Beaver Coats Colliery in Nottinghamshire, which is near Retford. And I did a kind of study of the geology and the temperature and everything to do with it, and made a site investigation plan for it. And then it was during this dissertation that I started learning more about like wider geothermal things, and came across this map that we all know and love. And yeah, I just found it really, really interesting. And at the time, I think they were either about to start or had done the drilling for the United Downs project down in Cornwall. I remember hearing about it and thinking it was really interesting. So yeah, that's kind of where my interest peaked, was from doing my Masters. So yeah, I came back to do a PhD after working for a while, and I'm glad that I did, because I thought it was a good experience. So yeah, now on to the main part of the talk, which is about my project, which I've done for Scottish Enterprise. It's part of my PhD, but it's also separate. And it's about unlocking the economic potential of Minewater Geothermal in Scotland. Okay, so this is what Scottish Enterprise were looking for. They wanted to identify different opportunities and challenges in developing a mine water industry in Scotland, and determine the awareness of this technology among different professionals and different industries. So yeah, we decided to limit the project just to these commercial and industrial stakeholders, instead of do community groups and landlords, because that would be a bit of a wider project. So I just thought I'd give a bit of context here for anyone who's watching who doesn't know what Minewater Geothermal is. So basically, you would drill a borehole down into a mine where it would be warm, bring the water up onto the surface and put it through a heat exchanger, which would then be linked to a heat pump, and that would provide heat and hot water for any buildings on the surface. And then the cooled down water could either be put back into the mine, or sometimes it can be released onto the surface, like into surface drainage. But so yeah, this is the basic principle of it, that it's warm in the mines and there's lots of water that could be brought out because of the abandoned nature of the mines. So this is a bit more about how the heat could be used. So one example is using it for an individual building. So this is the Lanchester Wines warehouse in Gateshead, where they're just heating, well, as they've actually got two sites, they're heating two different warehouses with the mine water. It could be used as a source for district heating, as shown here. The flooded mines show it comes up and goes around all houses. Or it could also be used as a thermal store in a district heating and cooling network, to kind of, waste heat from these different places could be put into the mine and used at a different time of year. And I think that would be a really good use of the mines. So the context of the project is also to try and understand what information stakeholders need in order to ask for mine water, or be aware of mine water as an option for their site. So once they've kind of drawn up their design like this, and they've already decided, oh, these are all going to be gas boilers or whatever it is, it's very difficult to go back in and change it without losing a lot of time and money. So they need to know at quite an early stage of a project development. So yeah, that was our kind of initial idea, was how will they know to ask for it. So I mean, yeah, another piece of context is that soon in Scotland there'll be no more gas boilers in new build homes. So housing developing companies will have to come up with new ways of heating people's homes and providing hot water. So the current favourite, I would say, from a house builder's perspective, is air source heat pumps. And this is from Redrow, which is one of the major house builders in the UK. And they have said they're going to use air source heat pumps and underfloor heating as a standard solution for their new builds going forward, which is a good step in the right direction. But I kind of thought I would look into whether air source heat pumps would be the best solution in Scotland. So I found this paper, which is about the air conditions and its effect on air source heat pumps. So this study looked at lots of different places in Italy with various different climates. Obviously, some of them are very different from here. And they basically found that so let me go back a step, sorry. The air source heat pumps become very inefficient when they're in frost forming conditions. So that would mean that the fans of the air source heat pumps become frosted up. And they can't work as well. So the air source heat pumps have to use more electricity to defrost themselves, basically. And this is what this is showing, the number of defrost cycles used by each heat pump. And they determined that it was to do with the relative humidity of the air and the temperature of the air. So I looked here at Milan, which has got the highest number of defrost cycles, and Naples, which has got the lowest. And they calculated in the paper the number of hours that the air was between 0 and 5 degrees during winter, and it was 1,697 in Milan compared to only 161 hours in Naples. And you can see also here that the relative humidity is much, much higher. So that's equal to about 70 days, whereas they only had 6.7 days where it was at that temperature. So this means that the air source heat pumps in Milan are basically, they'd be using more electricity and not heating up the homes as efficiently. So I decided to have a little look at Scotland's climate and see what that would mean. So these are from the Met Office, these figures, and basically I've blocked out here so we can see the temperature range between 0 and 6 degrees. And you can see that for 6 months of the year in Paisley, the temperature falls within that range. And the relative humidity up in Scotland in the Central Belt is between 84 and 86 or 88, which is obviously like the perfect conditions from that paper. And yeah, in the paper, they said that those conditions can cause the coefficient of performance to reduce by up to 17%. So basically my whole kind of thinking was that we need to make sure that we consider all the other options and that house builders don't just all follow down air source heat pumps, because that seems like an easy option. And obviously that does have benefits because it's cheaper, it's easier to install than ground source heat pumps. Like there are many benefits to them, but I think they need to consider other options as well. So moving on to what I've actually been doing. So yeah, I started off with a little stakeholder mapping exercise, thinking about which kind of stakeholders would need to know about this technology and like where in the industry they might sit. And then from that, we kind of identified some different people we could contact through my supervisors and their networks. And we reached out to them in about December time. And then I carried out the interviews in January and February. Then I transcribed all the interviews, which took quite a long time, as you can imagine. Each interview probably had around 8,000 words from an hour of talking, so that took a lot of time. And then I did a sort of initial analysis to kind of get a broad look at what all the data was showing me. And now I'm on this stage doing the thematic analysis, which is a lot more detailed. And then I'll go on to discuss what I found and provide some recommendations to Scottish Enterprise. So yeah, the stakeholder mapping, this is a basic overview of what the company's sort of groups that I thought we might want to contact. So obviously house builders and property developers being the main one, because that was our kind of focus of it. But then also they would have consultancies, and not just engineering, but other consultancies that would provide their plans and architects and things like that. So they would need to know. And then local authorities and landowners are kind of similar in that they they both have kind of assets like land that they might want to develop and which may have mines on. And then supply chain companies would need to know, because there might be a big influx of heat pumps needing to be manufactured, or pipe work, or whatever it is. And then utility companies I thought would be interested, because they have their own assets in the ground, such as gas and water pipes. So they would need to know if people are going to come along and need to access the subsurface as well. So these are the people that I interviewed. I've obviously made it anonymous for their privacy. And I think I got quite a good mixture of people. The only group that was missing was local authorities. And I think, yeah, we reached out to quite a few, but I think they're all just super busy at the moment, so that's fair enough. But yeah, this one here, they have two, because they would develop property, but the company owned land that they were developing and selling on to house building companies. So they've got two circles. So yeah, so some initial results from what I found. I started off, in order to make sense of all the information I'd collected, but just looking at the answers to one specific question that I asked during the interview, and that was, what methods of decarbonisation of heat are you aware of? This was just to get a bit of an overview of what people knew about in the wider industry, and to kind of gauge what was the most talked about thing. So this is a pie chart of what everybody said. I basically collated up all the answers that everybody said and made proportions of it. So heat pumps were the most mentioned, followed by district heating, and then followed by hydrogen, and then all these others, all kind of similar amounts. So yeah, heat pumps, some people specified and some people didn't. Some people just said heat pumps, and some people said all these different ones. And air source and ground source heat pumps are always mentioned together. I don't know why. I think that's just maybe the two that people know about the most. And then these ones, some people just said heat from rivers or heat from sewage, but I interpreted that to mean that they were these. So yeah, and then hydrogen was often mentioned at the end of their kind of talk about this, and they were generally a bit unsure about it as a solution for domestic heating. So yeah, I kind of thought I didn't want that to skew it, because that was kind of always mentioned at the end. So yeah, this is about, I had another question that was just, are you aware of the concept of this? And 9 people said that they were. And yeah, it was mainly from their educational background. There was a geologist, a geotechnical engineer, civil engineer, who had kind of just come across it in their general, from their background. And then some people working on similar projects, like a heat from the river kind of project. So they were kind of just aware of the wider industry. I'm going to go more into detail in this during my thematic analysis, and kind of look at maybe where they got the information from, but that's kind of ongoing. So yeah, this is some more results, a bit more detailed about concerns that people have. So one of the main ones was the cost of electricity, and how it's priced, and how people who are using heat pumps have to buy it from the grid at quite a high price, and that causes a lot of cost to be added on. And then yeah, the concern that was mentioned quite a lot is who's going to pay for it, because there's a high cost associated with drilling into mines and things like that. So yeah, some more here. So another one was the skills and labour shortage, which is generally being seen. So these concerns are general, they're not specific to Minewater, but I think they could be applied to Minewater because it's using very similar technology. So yeah, this one I found quite interesting, because people, the heating engineers, people who come and fit your boiler, they're not interested in changing their skills to doing heat pumps, because people are still wanting gas boilers and there's not really a demand. And that came up quite a lot, is that there needs to be a demand in order for people to do this kind of thing and this technology. And then this one, he was talking about their company had some experience with air source heat pumps a few years ago, and he said that there was going to be some kind of shortage, as I was saying earlier about this large company going for heat pumps. If one house building company does it, then all the others may follow, and then there'll be a massive demand. So yeah, the kind of what I want to do next is continue with the thematic analysis. So basically what I've done is I've gone through all the interviews and I've used these concerns, and I had a few others, and I was going through, and what you do is kind of code the interviews with the different themes, and then I was going through and kind of making themes as I went along and kind of seeing what came out of it. And I'm going to try and condense those down because I have a big long list of things that came out of all the interviews, and I'm going to try and condense it down into some key themes and then write about what the different sectors said about the different things. And that's kind of what I'm doing at the moment. And as you can imagine, going through all these interviews is quite time consuming. So I've kind of finished the main part of the coding of the interviews, and then I'm going to start doing the kind of writing that bit now. And yeah, so that's the end. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to have any questions. But yeah.
Thank you, Katherine. It's really good to hear a talk it's so practical and useful for the industry, and it's absolutely what it needs doing right at the beginning. If anyone has any questions, please pop them in the question box and I will get around to them. So there's one here. Oh, hold on a minute, just trying to read it. How would you increase, this is from Hester, how would you increase the awareness for Minewater?
I'm not sure. I think for house building companies particularly, I think if they could see one of their competitors maybe doing it and it being successful, that would kind of make people more aware of it. I think from what people have said in my interviews, they all seem to kind of do a similar, they like to do the same as what other people are doing. So maybe having I think a recommendation that might come from this is having a demonstration project that companies could go and visit, or whatever it might be, that they could see that it works and that it's been proven to work in the UK, to kind of build the trust. But as for supply chain companies and things, one of the people said that for heat pumps, they don't really mind where their heat source comes from, as long as they don't really mind. So I don't know if they would necessarily need to know in so much detail as maybe the house builders, but yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of hoping to come to that.
No, it's right. It's the geothermal curse, isn't it? Drill the first well and the next one will follow. It's really tricky in the UK. It's the same with deep geothermal. It's interesting that Minewater's getting a similar sort of pushback. Investors and people that are interested saying, "Oh, that sounds great, love the idea, but drill the first well and we might put our money where our mouth is." Are there any more questions from the audience? If not, I have one. What was I know this will come out in your thematic analysis, but what was the general feedback for Minewater, and were there any particular groups of stakeholders that were more keen than others?
Mostly people were quite positive about it, because of the kind of using an existing asset as a source of heat kind of line, and they were generally quite positive about that. One person was quite unsure about it when there's other options, potentially like river source, and he was kind of saying, why would you bother messing about drilling into the mine when you could use a river for the same purpose? So I think there needs to be it needs to be done in the right place at the right time, sort of thing. It shouldn't just be done all over, because it won't always be the right solution. But yeah, I think people were definitely interested in it, but kind of maybe slightly unsure of it. I'm not sure. I need to kind of unpick it from what people have said. But yeah, no, I think people were interested, especially when there's surface treatment works and how that's kind of already being brought to the surface, that people would seem to know about that, then had already kind of plopped onto that as an idea. So yeah.
And you might have said this already, but what was your sort of geographical area of stakeholders? Was it just Central Belt?
So they're all in Scotland, and they're mainly in Glasgow, just because of where I am and where my supervisors know people. I did go over to Edinburgh for one of them, but I did a couple online as well, and I think they were in Edinburgh, so mainly Glasgow and Edinburgh. So yeah, Central Belt, which is obviously where all the mines are in Scotland. So
yeah. Did the question of heritage come up at all? Sort of like we get in Cornwall, we get a massive sense of pride from communities that are using the subsurface and they like geothermal because of that. Did that come up?
Yeah, no, one of the people that I spoke to, they lived in East Ayrshire and they were very involved in their community, which was an ex-mining community. And they were saying how a lot of people are very they want to get involved with it because they, whether they're ex-miners or their dad was a miner or something, they've got kind of like a family history of it. And I think that is one of the things that I'm really kind of excited about for Minewater, is that it could be like a community-based thing. And there was a lot of talk from a few of the people about the ownership, who takes ownership of these kind of schemes, whether it be like community-owned mines and they get local benefits and things. So yeah, I think it's the same as what you were saying about how the local communities are very keen on using the subsurface, because it's a source of pride for them, especially as a lot of the places have kind of been a little bit left behind and they want to kind of, be kind of brought back into the kind of heyday. So yeah, I think that's a good angle of it.
Oh, you've got some more talks. I've got, thanks for a great talk, Katherine. Were there any concerns over possible induced subsidence from utilising Minewater geothermal or any other associated hazards?
I don't think people mentioned specifically subsidence as a concern. Something that did come up a lot around people who maybe weren't from a technical background was the association with fracking, that they thought, oh, is it like fracking? Are people going to think that we're fracking, etc.? That was something that was mentioned quite a lot. And then, someone brought up the kind of hazard of moving the water around underground would erode the surface of the mines within the mines, and whether that would cause collapse. But yeah, subsidence on the surface wasn't really mentioned by anybody. Apart from actually, one house builder did say that to house building companies, mines are like the devil incarnate. That was what he said. So he was like, we've spent a lot of time grouting up mines, which could have been useful. So yeah, I think for house builders, they try to avoid mines generally, obviously for the subsidence reason. But yeah, people who weren't associated with house building didn't say anything about it. So yeah. And then for other hazards, sorry, they said, I think someone said about like bringing the mine water to the surface, whether that would have a hazard and the kind of regulation of that. So yeah, sorry.
This one, no, we've got another one around hazards. It's kind of related. It said, did anyone raise major concerns around environmental impact?
Yeah, I thought that would come up more, to be honest, as a concern, but people, it wasn't mentioned as much as I thought. The main concerns around like barriers to mine water being developed were all to do with money and potentially the governance of it, and the ownership of who does it and who pays for it was more of a concern of people rather than any potential environmental risks, which is interesting. But yeah, the cost of it was often the main barrier that they saw.
That's quite interesting. Do you think that's because of the particular stakeholders that you interviewed?
Yeah, potentially. And I think one of them, they had actually like looked into this feasibility study and they'd found that ground source heat, if they put a ground source array, it was going to be more expensive than doing mine water. So they were like, maybe it's not as bad as everybody thinks. So that, yeah, I think maybe they just hear mine water and they hear drilling and they're like, oh, it's going to be loads of money. And maybe they don't, I don't know, maybe they needs to be more information about how much it's going to cost. But then that goes back to the kind of having a proven example and a site that's worked in the UK. So yeah.
Difficult, isn't it? So do I have any other questions? I think we are all our questions. Is there anything else you would like to say?
I don't think so. I think one thing I would say, actually, maybe if there's any like students or like, you know, people who don't know what to do, like if they're deciding what degree to do or something like that, like don't worry if you do one thing and then you go a different direction, like it doesn't matter. Like I didn't think I'd ever study in an engineering department, and here I am. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Good advice. Well, thank you for a really informative talk, and I look forward to hearing about your future results as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.